Welcome to Michael Potts F1, everything Formula One, but from a photographer's point of view. Race 20, the Brazilian Grand Prix. I'm here in Mount Zion National Park, which is absolutely spectacular. But the race I'd like to talk about is the Brazilian Grand Prix from Interlagos. It was my first trip to Interlagos, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's a brilliant old school racetrack. It's a very short lap, but it's got lots of brilliant corners, some great overtaking opportunities, and some wonderful places to take photographs from. The drivers absolutely love racing here, the fans are brilliant. It's everything you want from a Formula One race weekend. Over the years, this track has produced some absolute classics, and we got to see a little bit of that again this weekend. With my point number one, Alonso finishing third. Alonso and Perez had a monumental battle towards the end of the race, with the Spaniard beating the Mexican by the tiniest of margins. Sadly, I don't have any photographs of that battle because I was queuing for the podium celebrations, but I really did enjoy watching the highlights on TV. In the tunnel, I could hear the crowds going berserk as the two cars went around. It's a great result for Fernando and for the whole team. They've really struggled in the past few races. They had brought some upgrades which hadn't worked, and the team had been doing lots of experiments in the past few races, taking bits off, starting from the pit lane, trying different combinations, and it looks like they've finally nailed something that's a lot better than what they had. However, when you dig a little bit deeper, things might not be as rosy as they appear for Aston Martin. If you look at the sprint race, Alonso was involved in a huge crash with Esteban Ocon during the qualifying, but Lance Stroll was knocked out in Q1. Both cars only managed to finish 11th and 12th. So their result in the feature race is quite different to that. Lance Stroll qualified third, which is a huge improvement compared to where he's been recently. Fernando Alonso was alongside him in fourth, and that result comes from how well they played the conditions on Friday. Friday's qualifying was delayed by 15 minutes. And as the session progressed, massive storm clouds were developing around the racetrack. Aston Martin sent both cars out really early in qualifying, compared to McLaren, who were looking bolt-on favourites for pole position, sending their cars out later. Oscar Piastri, I think, was the last car out, and he couldn't set a time. Lando Norris, who set Q2 alight, only managed 7th place. But the Astons were 3 and 4, and that set them up for one of their best race results of the year. My point two, tropical storms. I was photographing turn 6 on the outside. This is a great corner where you can see the cars sparking magnificently. Here's a shot of Lando Norris taken in Q3, and you can see the sparks just flying out the back of the car. It's not only sparking from underneath, but also from the side of the floor. The corner's on a slight camber, and the floor catches it as the cars move through the corner. I've taken this with a Nikon Z9 at 800th of a second, f6.3 and ISO 6400. It was that dark. It's a very difficult spot to photograph from because there isn't really a gap in the fence. You have to kind of wedge your camera underneath the fence, and it's all very, very awkward. And the whole time I'm looking at the sky, seeing it get darker and darker and darker. And just after Oscar went through this corner, I dashed off back to the paddock, and the heavens opened. It was a massive storm. I've been caught out in a few tropical storms in Brazil in the past. Once in Iguazu Falls. They seem to generate very, very quickly, almost out of nothing, and have a ferocity which is very hard to describe. The session was called off. The podium celebration was called off. We had this weird moment of drivers still being interviewed in the pen while rain was lashing down on them, and everyone in the paddock was huddling to try and stay dry. It was quite an introduction to Formula One racing in Sao Paulo. Point 3, the fight for 7th place. And the fight not to be last. We have 4 teams that are all quite close to each other, battling not only for bragging rights at the bottom of the table, but also for an awful lot of money. There's a $20 to $30 million difference between 7th and 10th. That is an awful lot of money. Currently, Williams occupy 7th place with 28 points, from AlphaTauri on 21, Alfa Romeo on 9th on 16, and Haas are 10th on 12. If you remember back a few races ago, AlphaTauri were in last place. That's how quickly things can turn around in this battle. We only have 2 races left, and everything can still change in that time. But it's not only on the track that they're fighting, but it's also in the courtroom. Haas have just launched a challenge against the results from the USA Grand Prix. Here's my video on that race, but if you remember back to it, there were two cars disqualified, Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc, for excessive wear on their planks. But not only that, there were a lot of cars running wide and not being penalised for exceeding track limits. This was partly due to the positioning of the FIA camera to monitor that corner. Haas thought that they had some new information in providing some onboard footage of cars going wide, and if they were successful, they could have had Alex Albon, Logan Sargent, Sergio Perez, Lance Stroll all penalised. And that would have promoted their driver, Nico Hülkenberg, up the standings. Unfortunately for Haas, FIA threw out the appeal on a technical matter. They stated that the evidence provided by Haas wasn't new information, and they were no longer able to change the results. But that just shows how heated things have become in this fight. So do keep an eye out on the teams in the lower reaches to see who's going to come out on top. Inside this battle, there's huge personal pressure on the drivers. For example, Logan Sargent still hasn't got a seat confirmed for 2024. He has 2 races left to show what he can do, and he has Mick Schumacher and Liam Lawson eager to deprive him of that drive. Another contender, Felipe Drugovich, has signed as Aston Martin's reserve driver for 2024, so he's out of contention. The battle for 7th was complicated further by a massive crash at the start of this race, which is my point 4, the crash at the start. This is the 3rd first corner incident we've had in the past 4 races, and it was a huge crash involving Alex Albon and the 2 Haases. I was shooting from the bottom of the centre S's, and the first thing I noticed about this was seeing Nico Hülkenberg run wide. Then, a tyre started bouncing down the hill towards us. Once I'd photographed that possibly a little bit too long, I scanned around to see what had happened, and I could see both cars involved in the crash parked up on the top of the hill. Thankfully, both drivers were able to get out and were unscathed. This is a really beautiful place to photograph cars from because you get some amazing patterns of the cars coming through these S's. There's always a lot of overtakes, a lot of cars very, very close together, and you also have a bonus of photographing cars leaving the pits from a very, very cool angle. There was some very nice shadows creating some very dramatic images. And because of that crash, the race was red flagged, and we actually got our 3rd race start of the weekend. And it was an opportunity to see Max and Lando going at it again. This leads me to point 5, Max Verstappen wins again. I said in a recent video that Max is running out of records to break, but he has broken another one. He now has the highest win percentage in a Formula 1 season, beating Alberto Ascari's record, which has lasted since 1952. And Max still has 2 races on which to improve on that. One thing that he's improved over the course of the year is his race starts. We saw in Mexico that he came from 3rd position to 1st in the first corner. In the sprint race, he started 2nd, but by the first corner he was in the lead. And he was untroubled in both restarts starting from pole position. He did, however, get some pretty fierce competition from Lando Norris, who at one point actually looked like he was able to challenge Max for the lead. It was the briefest of moments. Max then appeared to find another gear in his RB19 and cruised away to his 17th win of the year, leaving Lando Norris with the joint dubious record of most podiums without a race victory. He's now stood on steps 2 and 3 13 times without ever making it to the top. But you feel with Lando, it's only a matter of time. He is surely Formula One's next race winner. Thank you so much for joining me at this look back over the Brazilian Grand Prix. I do hope you've enjoyed it. If you'd like to see some more photographs from the race, there's a link to my site in the description below. Next, we're off to Vegas, which should be very interesting. So until then, goodbye.